In the heart of Colombia, one man rose from the dusty streets of Medellin to command an empire that challenged nations. He was a visionary to some, and a villain to the world. This is the untold story of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, the king of cocaine. Welcome to Underworld Archives. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in the small town of Rio Negro, located in the Antioquia department of Colombia. He was the third of 7 children. His father, Abel de Jesus Dari Escobar, worked as a farmer, while his mother, Hermilda Gaviria, was a dedicated schoolteacher. The family lived modestly, and though they were not destitute, young Pablo grew up surrounded by poverty, a reality that deeply shaped his ambitions. From an early age, Escobar demonstrated both intelligence and defiance. Teachers described him as bright but restless, curious yet impatient with authority. Even as a teenager, he was drawn toward money and power, believing that wealth was the key to respect. In his teenage years, Escobar dropped out of college, where he had been studying briefly at Universidad Autónoma Latinoamericana in Medellin. He soon began participating in petty criminal activities, selling fake diplomas, smuggling cigarettes, and even stealing tombstones to resell them. This early involvement in low-level black market trading introduced him to Medellin's growing underworld. By the mid-1970s, the illegal drug trade in Colombia was still in its infancy. The country had long been involved in the smuggling of contraband goods, particularly marijuana, to the United States. However, a new product, cocaine, was quickly becoming more profitable. At the time, cocaine was a luxury drug in North America, and demand was growing among the wealthy elite. Escobar saw opportunity where others saw risk. With his sharp business sense and growing connections, he began to enter the cocaine business through small-scale operations. Partnering with local traffickers, he helped transport shipments through the Andes and the Caribbean to reach markets in Miami. These early ventures were modest, but the profits were staggering compared to anything Escobar had seen before. By 1976, Escobar had built his first real organization. It was during this period that he met and married Maria Victoria Henao, who was only 15 years old at the time. Their marriage would produce 2 children, Juan Pablo and Manuela. Despite his attempts to live a double life as a family man, Escobar's focus remained fixed on expanding his empire. As the demand for cocaine in the United States skyrocketed, Escobar began organizing a more structured network. He acquired aircraft, pilots, and smuggling routes through Panama and the Bahamas, establishing connections with suppliers in Peru and Bolivia, where the raw coca leaves were cultivated. With his growing wealth, he built laboratories deep within Colombia's jungles, where the leaves were processed into pure cocaine hydrochloride. This industrialization of the cocaine trade was revolutionary. Escobar's operations soon became part of what would later be known as the Medellin cartel, a powerful criminal syndicate that dominated the global cocaine market throughout the 1980s. Escobar's business strategy was both ruthless and efficient. He paid his workers well, rewarded loyalty, and ensured that everyone involved in his operation, from farmers to pilots, benefited financially. But his generosity came with a cost. Betrayal was met with swift and brutal punishment. By the late 1970s, Escobar was shipping several tons of cocaine each week into the United States. His profits soared into the hundreds of millions. He used this wealth to build networks of corruption, bribing police, judges, politicians, and military officials to protect his business. Those who refused his offers were often assassinated. Escobar's famous phrase, plata o plomo, meaning silver or lead, summarized his approach to power. People could accept his money or they could face his bullets. As his influence grew, Escobar began to see himself not merely as a criminal but as a kind of revolutionary figure. He poured millions into public housing projects, soccer fields, and charitable programs for the poor in Medellin. For many of the city's impoverished residents, Escobar became a Robin Hood-like figure, a man who defied the elite and provided for the forgotten. This image of generosity earned him enormous local support. Neighborhoods that benefited from his projects protected him fiercely, often refusing to cooperate with authorities. To the poor, Escobar was not just a trafficker, he was a savior. But behind this benevolent facade, Escobar's empire was built on violence. Rivals who threatened his territory were eliminated without hesitation. Competing traffickers, corrupt police officers who demanded too much, and even former allies, all fell to Escobar's brutal enforcement squads. By the early 1980s, the Medellin cartel controlled an estimated 80% of the world's cocaine market. Escobar's personal fortune grew so vast that Forbes magazine would later list him as one of the richest men on earth, with an estimated net worth exceeding $30 billion at his peak. To store his wealth, Escobar bought vast properties across Colombia, including his most famous estate, Hacienda Napoles. The estate stretched over thousands of acres and included a private zoo with exotic animals, luxury houses, swimming pools, and even a collection of vintage cars and airplanes. It symbolized not only his wealth but his audacious defiance of law and authority. Despite his growing power, Escobar sought legitimacy. In 1982, he entered politics, winning a seat in the Colombian Congress as an alternate member. His move shocked the establishment. Here was a man openly known for his underworld connections, now walking the halls of government. For a brief time, Escobar enjoyed political acceptance. He donated to infrastructure projects and was praised for his community development efforts. But his opponents within the government soon began exposing his criminal background. One of them, Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, became one of Escobar's most vocal critics. In 1984, Lara publicly denounced Escobar in Congress, presenting evidence of his involvement in the cocaine trade. The result was swift and deadly. Lara was assassinated in Bogotá later that year, shot to death by motorcycle gunmen believed to have acted on Escobar's orders. The murder of a sitting minister changed everything. The Colombian government, under increasing pressure from the United States, declared war on Escobar and the Medellin cartel. The days of open influence and political play were over. Escobar had crossed a line that could not be ignored. From this point forward, Colombia entered a new era, one marked by unprecedented violence, fear, and corruption. Escobar's empire had reached its zenith, but the forces aligned against him were now growing stronger and more determined than ever. As 1984 drew to a close, the Colombian state had identified Escobar as its greatest internal threat. Yet for every move the government made, Escobar was ready with one of his own, a master strategist in a deadly game that would soon engulf an entire nation. By the mid-1980s, Pablo Escobar was not just Colombia's most powerful drug trafficker. He was one of the most influential figures in the entire Western Hemisphere. His operations extended far beyond the borders of his country. His cocaine reached the streets of Miami, New York, Los Angeles, and even as far as Europe and Asia. At the height of his operations, it was estimated that the Medellin cartel smuggled between 70 to 80 tons of cocaine into the United States every month. The profits were staggering. Each kilogram of cocaine, produced in Colombia for a few $1,000s, sold in the United States for as much as $50,000. The wealth generated from this trade transformed Escobar into a global icon of organized crime, feared by governments, admired by some, and hated by many. However, this unprecedented success came at an enormous cost. The assassination of Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla in 1984 marked the beginning of a bloody confrontation between Escobar and the Colombian state. The government, under President Belisario Betancourt, responded by signing an extradition treaty with the United States, allowing Colombian traffickers to be tried on American soil. For Escobar, extradition was a fate worse than death. He declared that he would rather die in Colombia than face trial in the United States. From that point onward, his battle cry became, "We prefer a grave in Colombia to a prison in the United States." The government's attempt to crack down on the cartel only intensified Escobar's violence. Judges, police officers, and politicians who supported extradition became prime targets. Between 1984 and 1990, hundreds of Colombian officials were assassinated. Bombings became a common tactic. Public buildings, vehicles, and even airplanes were targeted. Escobar's campaign of terror extended to civilians. He aimed to create chaos and fear, hoping to force the government into negotiating on his terms. The violence reached its peak in the late 1980s, as the Medellin cartel fought against both the Colombian state and rival organizations. While Escobar was the undisputed leader of the Medellin cartel, he did not operate alone. The cartel was a complex network of traffickers, each controlling different regions and operations. Among his closest associates were the Ochoa brothers, Jorge Luis, Fabio, and Juan David, as well as Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as El Mexicano. These men shared Escobar's ambitions and brutality, but internal tensions soon began to grow. Some members of the cartel preferred negotiation with the government, while Escobar favored confrontation and terror. The cartel's influence extended deeply into Colombian society. Corruption was rampant at every level. Police officers, soldiers, and judges were routinely bribed or threatened. Entire communities in Medellin were under Escobar's control, and many locals protected him out of loyalty or fear. During this period, Escobar's wealth reached legendary proportions. According to reports, his cartel earned over $400 million per week. The money was so vast that storing it became a logistical challenge. It was said that Escobar spent thousands of dollars each month on rubber bands to wrap stacks of cash, and that rats destroyed millions of dollars hidden in remote storage sites. In the midst of his growing power, Escobar continued to cultivate his image as a man of the people. In Medellin's poorest neighborhoods, he funded housing developments, built schools, and supported local sports clubs. These efforts earned him the nickname El Patron, the boss. But as his reputation grew, so did the pressure from international forces. The United States, through the Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA), intensified its operations in Colombia. American intelligence agencies provided the Colombian military with technology, training, and resources to combat the Medellin cartel. The cooperation between the two countries marked a turning point. For the first time, Escobar faced a coordinated global effort aimed specifically at dismantling his empire. In 1989, the violence reached horrifying new levels. That year, Escobar ordered the assassination of presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán, who had publicly supported extradition and vowed to fight the cartels. Galán was shot dead at a political rally, an event that shocked the nation and confirmed that no one was beyond Escobar's reach. In response, the Colombian government declared a national emergency. The army launched massive operations in Medellin, raiding cartel properties and arresting hundreds of associates. But for every victory, the cartel struck back harder. Later that same year, Escobar orchestrated one of the deadliest acts of terrorism in Colombia's history, the bombing of Avianca Flight 203. The aircraft, en route from Bogotá to Cali, exploded mid-air, killing all 107 people on board. The target was believed to be another presidential candidate, Cesar Gaviria, who ultimately did not board the flight. The act marked a point of no return. Public sentiment turned sharply against Escobar. Internationally, he became a symbol of narco-terrorism, a criminal who held an entire nation hostage. By 1990, Escobar's empire began to show signs of strain. Rival cartels, particularly the Cali cartel, saw an opportunity to challenge Medellin's dominance. Led by the Rodriguez Orihuela brothers, the Cali cartel adopted a more discreet and business-oriented approach. Unlike Escobar, they preferred bribery over violence and maintained a lower profile, which earned them favor with law enforcement agencies eager to see Escobar fall. Facing pressure from every side, Escobar sought to negotiate. In 1991, he made a surprising offer to the Colombian government. He would surrender, but only under specific conditions. He demanded assurance that he would not be extradited to the United States and that he could serve his sentence in a prison of his own design. Remarkably, the government agreed. On June 19, 1991, Escobar surrendered to authorities and was taken to a facility he had built himself, La Catedral. La Catedral was unlike any other prison in the world. Situated on a hill overlooking Medellin, it was equipped with a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and luxurious accommodations. Escobar handpicked his guards and continued to run his operations from within its walls. For the government, his surrender was meant to end years of bloodshed. For Escobar, it was simply a new form of control. He continued managing his cartel, settling scores, and ordering assassinations from within his so-called prison. In 1992, the illusion of peace collapsed. Reports emerged that Escobar had tortured and murdered 2 of his own lieutenants inside La Catedral. The Colombian authorities, humiliated by international outrage, decided to transfer him to a real prison. But before they could act, Escobar escaped. Once again, the world's most wanted man vanished into the Colombian hills. When Pablo Escobar escaped from his self-made prison in 1992, Colombia entered one of the most turbulent periods in its modern history. The government, humiliated by his audacity, mobilized every available resource to capture him. At the same time, the United States increased its involvement, providing intelligence, surveillance technology, and logistical support through the Drug Enforcement Administration and other agencies. The manhunt for Escobar became one of the largest in Latin American history. The Colombian police created a special task force known as the Search Block, an elite unit trained specifically to locate and apprehend him. Their mission was clear: find Escobar, dead or alive. Escobar's escape reignited chaos across the nation. He quickly reasserted control over remnants of his Medellin cartel, ordering new acts of violence to intimidate his enemies. Explosions, kidnappings, and assassinations once again became common occurrences in Colombian cities. However, this time, Escobar found himself increasingly isolated. Many of his old allies had either been killed, captured, or had switched allegiance. The Cali cartel, his longtime rivals, saw his downfall as an opportunity to expand their influence. They quietly supported the government's efforts to eliminate him, providing intelligence through intermediaries. Even more threatening was the rise of a mysterious vigilante group known as Los Peeps, short for Perseguidos por Pablo Escobar, meaning people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. This group was composed of former cartel members, businessmen, and paramilitary forces who had suffered under Escobar's reign. Their objective was simple: to destroy everything connected to him. Los Peeps waged a ruthless campaign. They targeted Escobar's family, assassinated his lawyers, and bombed properties linked to his organization. Their brutality rivaled his own. Although the Colombian and American governments officially denied any connection to Los Peeps, evidence later suggested that members of the Search Block may have turned a blind eye to their activities, allowing them to weaken Escobar's network from the shadows. By late 1992, Escobar's empire was crumbling. His wealth, once measured in billions, was now inaccessible. His trusted lieutenants were dead or in hiding, and his family, fearing for their lives, sought refuge abroad. His wife and children eventually fled Colombia under government protection. For the first time, Escobar was truly alone. Still, he continued to evade capture. Using his knowledge of Medellin streets and his network of loyal supporters, he managed to stay hidden for over a year. He constantly moved between safe houses, communicating through couriers and radio transmitters. Despite the constant pursuit, Escobar maintained an almost mythical ability to disappear. In early 1993, the pressure intensified. The Search Block, assisted by U.S. intelligence, tracked Escobar's phone calls and intercepted his communications. Technology played a decisive role. Signal triangulation helped narrow down his location each time he attempted to contact his family. On December 2, 1993, Escobar made a call to his son. It lasted several minutes, long enough for the authorities to trace the signal to a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin known as Los Olivos. Within moments, Search Block units surrounded the area. As they approached the building, Escobar realized he had been found. He attempted to escape through the rooftops, running barefoot across the tiles. A brief exchange of gunfire followed. Moments later, he was shot and killed. The official report stated that Escobar was killed by the Colombian National Police. However, some of his relatives and former associates have maintained that he took his own life, shooting himself with the pistol he always carried. The truth of that moment remains uncertain, but the outcome was undeniable. The reign of Pablo Escobar had come to an end. News of his death spread rapidly across Colombia and the world. Crowds gathered outside his home and in the streets of Medellin. Some celebrated, others mourned. More than 25,000 people attended his funeral, many of them residents of the neighborhoods he had once supported. To them he was still El Patron, the man who had built homes, schools, and football fields. For Colombia, his death marked both an end and a beginning. The era of the Medellin cartel was over, but the cocaine trade did not disappear. Instead, power shifted to the Cali cartel and later to smaller, more fragmented criminal organizations. In the years that followed, Colombia struggled to rebuild from the devastation left by Escobar's war. The cost had been immense: thousands of lives lost, entire institutions corrupted, and a generation scarred by fear and violence. Escobar's story remains one of the most striking examples of how power and ambition can transform a single man into a force that reshapes an entire nation. His legacy is deeply conflicted. To the poor communities of Medellin, he is still remembered as a benefactor, a man who gave when the government would not. To the world, he is remembered as one of the most violent and ruthless criminals in history. His impact on global narcotics trafficking was enormous. The systems he helped create, from smuggling routes to money laundering networks, would later serve as models for other criminal enterprises worldwide. Even decades after his death, the echoes of his empire can still be felt in the underworld economies of Latin America. Escobar's life illustrates a paradox of power: how generosity can coexist with cruelty, how charisma can mask corruption, and how the pursuit of wealth without limits can ultimately lead to ruin. Today, his former estate, Hacienda Napoles, has been converted into a public theme park, a strange transformation from the fortress of a drug lord into a place of leisure and tourism. Visitors walk through its grounds, seeing the remnants of a life built on both ambition and blood. In Medellin, the city that once feared his name has changed dramatically. Once one of the most dangerous cities in the world, it has become a symbol of resilience and renewal. Yet, the shadow of Escobar lingers, in stories, in films, in television, and in the memories of those who lived through his time. More than 30 years after his death, Pablo Escobar remains an enduring figure in history, not because of admiration, but because his story reveals the human capacity for both creation and destruction. His empire collapsed, but his legend continues to fascinate and disturb. He began as a young man seeking fortune and respect in a poor Colombian town. He ended as the most infamous drug trafficker the world has ever known. This is the legacy of Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, a man whose ambition built an empire and whose violence brought it crashing down. You've been listening to Underworld Archives. Join us next time as we uncover another story from the hidden corridors of global crime, where ambition, power, and consequence intertwine.